Hello and welcome to a Bergkamp Wonderland, an Arsenal podcast. Tonight I'm your host, FK. You may know me as F Carnage. I'm one of the regular guest members of the podcast, and I'm hosting in Gimli's absence for a special North London derby episode. And we'll also be looking at some injuries that have recently hit the news about Arsenal in recent days. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by our regular button monkey, our brilliantly talented producer, Danny the GFP. Danny, how are you?
I'm very good. Full of dinner, Sunday roast. Roast.
Yeah, did you have a good day today? Obviously basking in the sunshine and watching the North London derby.
No, I did my usual. I fell asleep. My alarm went off. I fell asleep, and luckily my friends come round at 3:10 just to after they come back from their holiday. Woke me up. I went, oh fuck, the game starts in 50 minutes. I had to get up and hurry up, so I nearly missed it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you didn't.
Yeah.
We're also joined by Pedro from Le Grove. Ped, how are you?
All good, guys. All good.
Yeah, did you enjoy the game today?
Yeah, I enjoyed the game. Just like pretext, I have had a few beers, so sorry if it's a bit slurry.
You'd be forgiven for that. It was a great day. And last but by certainly no means least, we're also joined by Dominic from Australia. He's known at Ozguna49, who is also an expert in strength and conditioning, and we'll explain what that kind of means later. But Dom, how are you?
A little bit sleepy, but that's all right. With an Arsenal win, it's always nice to wake up to.
Just so everybody knows, all the listeners out there, what time is it where you are at the minute?
It's just turned 6 a.m.
Wow, hardcore dedication. Okay, well, look, let's get cracking. It's a special episode. We'll focus straight away on the North London derby. Arsenal obviously going to Spurs today, and it was an important win for us. We got the win, we got the 3 points. To talk us through your thoughts on the performance, let's go straight to Danny.
I'll tell you what. I'll start this with the interview at the end of the game, and I almost choked up when I saw the interview with Rosicky at the end of the game. You know, when he was there with Koscielny, and I thought, what a wonderful player, what a wonderful gent, and he just typifies what happens if you stick with a player through thick and thin, which is what we managed to do with him through all those 18 months of injury where he didn't play a game. And now he's come back, scored for Czechoslovakia in the other week, and he scored for us in the league and scored again today. And the way that they showed him the replay, and then he said, they went, oh, and both feet off the floor, is that how you're meant to do it? And he went, no, not really. And then he just smiled. So I think it's just absolutely amazing. A fantastic goal. I thought the Ox showed how much promise that bloke has got. I mean, I can't think of many other players in the Premier League that show as much promise as the Ox is showing now. I think the whole event of today got to him a little bit because he was shooting from everywhere. Cazorla was getting stressed out because every time the Ox got the ball, he'd have a shot at a goal, and Cazorla would just be standing there going, what the hell are you doing? I mean, in the first half he had 3 great chances as it was, but nobody can say anything negative about any of our players today. They were fantastic, and for me, the perfect season starts with a home win against these scumbags, and then an away win, and then to have a cup win as well just sums this season up as being fantastic. A great way to go and do it. And like I just said on Twitter, that Spurs were shit with Redknapp, they were shit with AVB, they were shit with AVB plus 103 million, and they're shit with an Arsenal fan as a manager. And then there's one common theme in there, that Spurs are shit. And just the other player I think that I put on Twitter, that I think Arteta had a really good game, and some people saying, what do you mean a good game? These are the same people who say that Ozil has shit games, he doesn't do anything. But you watch, if you had a cam on Arteta the whole game, you see how often he dipped back into the back four, how many times he cleared the ball 2 or 3 times. One of those was really important. He was covering for the centre backs as they ran forward. He was covering on the sides. He was passing the balls through. He was standing in the middle of the park with his arms out, pointing to other players where to give the ball to. And I think that just was brilliant. And even my favourite, Podolski, I even think he had a hell of a game, which was fantastic.
So you're obviously very, very happy with the victory, as I'm sure we all are. The thing is, obviously, all Arsenal fans will always look at the Tottenham fixture as the first one on the fixture list. As soon as the fixture list come out, you just want to know when you go in there, and you know when you want to, you just want to see when you're hosting them. But for me, obviously, the biggest and most important thing on Derby Day is just to beat the enemy. You don't want to. It's not about performance. Your form goes out the window. You just want those 3 points. And the biggest thing for me is that every year they give it the big. Every year they tell us how they're going to oust us and finish above us in the league. And this season we've played them 3 times, beat them 3 times, clean sheet every game. And today I thought of the 3 matches we were probably at our poorest. I'll explain why I thought that later. But Ped, would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, I don't think we were. I don't think we were very good today. But like the goal that kicked the game off, set the tone. Spurs missed some really good chances. I thought Adebayor played pretty well, but they just didn't have a clinical edge today. And I think at this stage of the season, when we're chasing the league, it was so important. Like I don't really care how the win happened because it's against Spurs. If we beat Spurs, and we beat them playing badly, for me, that's almost better than having a completely stunning game. And the important thing is that we, like us and Liverpool, move away from the top four chasing pack. So now it's City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool gunning for the title, and that's so important that we don't have to look over our shoulders anymore. So massive win. I don't really care about the performance. It was poor, but we've had quite a lot of performances this year where we've played poor. Beating Spurs is the key, and it's like we're in the top four now. It's just, do we have enough to win the league?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think given the situation of the injuries that we've got and the players that we were missing today, and I think also with the week that we've had, to go to to beat Everton in the cup, to go to Bayern, and do the whole Champions League thing during the week, I think we were literally running on empty. And I personally thought that we just ran out of legs second half, and we invited so much pressure. And then when Soldado came on, I had this worry about him scoring from open play, given all the mocking and jeering that we've given them as a fan base all throughout the year. Dominic, let's go over to you. I mean, you've obviously stayed up the entire night to watch your team, demonstrate victory in a great derby. What are your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I think you guys have summed it up pretty well. I thought that we had a few good chances in the first half an hour or so. Oxlade-Chamberlain obviously missing a couple, which would have made us sit a little easier for the rest of the game. But at the end of the day, 1-0 to the Arsenal. Hopefully we can move on and put a nice little run together for the rest of the season. And we've got obviously Chelsea and City coming up, and Liverpool have got Chelsea and City coming up. So I think the title race is by no means said and done just yet. So it should be quite interesting.
Do you think we should be alarmed by the nature of our performance, maybe? I mean, Pedro touched upon the fact that actually it doesn't really matter. It's about Derby, it's about picking up the points and just keeping in that title race and having a bit of a gap between us and fifth and sixth and the rest of the teams. But I thought we were flailing towards the end. We were literally sort of hanging on. Is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah, yes and no. I think Arsenal's done that a few times this season. He's had a 1-0 win, and he's backed his defenders in to sort of hold the game out, which is very un-Arsenal-like, really. And for all the tactical sort of criticism that he gets sometimes, it seemed to have worked so far every time that he's put fullbacks on and tried to defend a lead. And you just know the one time that he doesn't and it doesn't come off, he's going to get absolutely belted. But yeah, yes and no. I think when you go 1-0 up so early in a game, you're always going to sort of sit back a little bit and maybe try to get them on the counter, which is what we did. I think we only had 41% possession for the game, according to my little app that I've got in front of me. So, which is right, quite strange.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, 41% possession. I think it's the least possession we've had in any game this season. But of course, as everybody always keeps saying, the score is the most important thing. Pedro, just going back to you. I mean, obviously we've got Chelsea now coming up next Saturday. Massive game. Arsene Wenger's 1,000th game. Do you think we can play the same as we did today in terms of performance and get anything there? Anything we need to change?
I really don't know. I mean, I didn't think Chelsea would lose to Aston Villa. I live with an Aston Villa fan, and he told me that I think that's the only ground that Mourinho's never won at. I think when it comes to top four, and there's very little between the players, apart from how you prepare and what you do tactically, we kind of get found out. So I don't hold out a huge amount of hope of us beating Mourinho. It's like he's got the psychological edge over us. But for me, this season is about maybe winning a cup. And if we can finish in the top three, that would be magnificent, because we'll have something to build on. So it'd be great to beat Chelsea. I don't hold out a whole lot of hope. I think that it's kind of now Manchester City's title to lose, but you just don't know this season. Every team in the league can get a result against any other team, and that's why we've got the best league in Europe, and that's why it's so exciting this year. I mean, there's 4 teams that can genuinely win the league this year, so someone's going to go on a run now. Could that be Arsenal? I don't think so, because we've got so many players out injured, but you never know. I mean, I think it was either last season or the season before, we got a lot of key injuries to big players, and then we had a big surge for the top 4 because we just drilled it out. So maybe that could be us this year.
Absolutely. You make a good point, actually, about Manchester City, but also Liverpool. An impressive victory away at Old Trafford today against a poor Manchester United team, but nonetheless, they've gone there and got the 3 points quite convincingly. Danny, would you say, I mean, that's just sort of focusing away from the game today, but looking at the title race, the bigger picture, obviously that puts us straight back in it, but how do you rate our chances?
Well, pretty good. If you look at our running, I think with Man City barely scraping a win, they've got Aguero out. They're now going to have the captain, whose name I can't remember. Company, he's going to be out for, I thought 3 games, but that's only violent conduct. Straight red is 1 game, as I found out to my cost when I was going, hey, he's going to miss the game against us. So that's going to not help them, because they are probably their 2 best players, along with Yaya Toure, who's not having a great time at the moment. Liverpool, I always think that Liverpool are a little bit like Arsenal years ago. They're very quick down the wings with Sturridge and Sterling and Suarez up front. But I think if you really get stuck into them like we did at home and we did in both the FA Cup and the Premier League, they tend to crumble. So I think that's the way they can be found out, much like Wigan have found out how to beat Man City. And then, like, our next game is away at Chelsea. Chelsea have had Mourinho sent off, so I don't think will that be. I think they have changed the rules with that. If you get sent off, it applies straight away. So they're going to have Ramirez and Willian not there for that game. Is that right? Or if they appeal it, do you reckon he'll try appealing it?
Well, I don't know. I think the FA have got to press charges. Guys, do you know anything about that? I mean, I'm not sure if it's an automatic ban for the next game for the manager. Pedro, do you know anything about that?
No, but like Mourinho got banned a few years ago, and didn't they wheel him in like
a laundry
bin or something like that. I don't think a management ban on the sidelines is a massive issue. But I think like Danny was saying, like there are a lot of things that run in our favour over the next few weeks. Like before we play Manchester City, they have the Manchester derby on the Tuesday, so we get a lot more rest in between. Before we play Chelsea, they have Galatasaray and Drogba back. And that game's like evenly poised, so hopefully that'll go to extra time. And Chelsea have got a ban on Ramirez after that disgusting tackle at the weekend. So there are a lot of things falling in our favour against the big teams that didn't fall in our favour at the first half of the season. Like every time we played a massive club, it was always off the back end of a long cycle of games where we really had to play our first 11 in every game. So like really, really interested into the season. And it's just like, do Arsenal have enough character in the side? And do the players that are coming in for people like Ozil, Jack and Theo, do they have the balls to go, look, I'm going to make myself a hero for the last few games of the season? So interesting times ahead.
Absolutely. And just finally about the North London derby, I mean, my thoughts on the game was that obviously it was just the most important thing was just to get the win. I don't think the performance was anything worth kind of talking about. Actually, I thought we were really poor in the second half. I think the players looked very, very tired, very lethargic, particularly Giroud from the very top. There was just every time they got the ball, we just invited pressure on ourselves, and we made it very difficult for ourselves. Even though Koscielny and Mertesacker were outstanding, defensively we looked fairly solid, but like you said, Pedro, at the start, on another day, if Spurs were a bit more clinical, and Adebayor always proved to be a handful, not only with his movement but just his physical presence, and it could have gone horribly wrong. But I'm glad it didn't, and for the 3rd time this season, we've kept a clean sheet, we've beaten them again, and that surely now puts to bed any chance of them finishing above us. That's my opinion. The final thing that I just wanted to touch upon was I don't know if you guys have seen, but our goalkeeper Wojciech Szczesny taking a selfie at the end of the game. A lot's been made of it.
Where did he have the phone? Was it in his sock, or did he get it off? At first I thought maybe he'd gone into the crowd and got a phone off of them, or did he have it in his man bag?
Probably just picked up out of his kit bag after.
That was brilliant, though, wasn't it?
I would be very surprised if he had it in his sock.
I say that because at one point he leant down after he'd taken a photo, and I thought he was putting it back in his sock. But I think it was a little bit like the stuff that happened at the Oscars. And then did you see Podolski at the end where he was trying to get Rosicky to be shown on camera? And I think that just shows the whole spirit of the club and the friendliness, the stuff that when Ashley Cole left. One of the reasons he said he was leaving is because there was no harmony in the dressing room. Everybody had their own little cliques, but every single one of those players went up to each other and they looked like they genuinely were happy, and they really understood what it meant as Arsenal players to us Arsenal fans to spank them yet again 3 times in a season, which I don't think we've ever done. Well, I haven't done. I think they said the last time we beat them 3 times in a season was 1980.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So has he posted the pictures yet on Twitter?
I've seen a couple. I've actually seen a photograph of them taking the selfie, and in that photograph, you can see their reflection in their iPhone, which is quite unique. I tweeted that recently, as in just a couple of hours ago. But I can't imagine, or I haven't actually seen Szczesny's photo. I suspect he'll release it via Facebook or Twitter at some point.
What I keep meaning to do is set up another Twitter account, because I run 3 at the moment, and then set up another one, and it's only going to be, and I follow all Arsenal-related ex-players and current players, and because I don't follow any Arsenal players. I don't know if anybody else follows any Arsenal players. I followed Szczesny for a little while in Wiltshire, but too many of them are just doing stuff for promotion purposes, and you think, are they even tweeting stuff themselves? So I don't really want to have all them on my timeline trying to flog me stuff I'm not interested in.
Has the photo come up, Dom?
Yeah, the photos come up. Was it Mertesacker next to Gibbs? It hasn't quite made the cut. Looks like he's been edited out.
Probably just too tall.
It's good though. He's good.
Our friend Kay, who does the Gooner Girls podcast, she's just tweeted the picture up, and you can see Szczesny in the middle. You see the Ox to the left of him. You can just see a tiny bit of the BFG's head, and then you can see Podolski on the right, and quite aptly in the background, the Spurs have that stuff that goes around the outside of the upper tier. It says "is about glory." So I don't know if that was planned to get that out there, but that's included in our thing, and it's in blue and white, so it's obviously part of their stadium promotion stuff. That's genius.
I think there's an element of it being planned there. If Szczesny's had his iPhone in his bag, whatever, behind his goal, then you can imagine it's the sort of guy that he is. I mean, he's given a lot of banter over the last sort of 2-3 years on Facebook, and there's a couple of digs towards Tottenham fans that I've seen. He did the whole 2-0 thing. He did the whole scenes at the Etihad when Spurs got smashed 6-0 or whatever it was, and he's been hung out to dry by that, because obviously we got beat at the Etihad as well. But he's a feisty one, is Jez. So I think it was just a little bit of banter. Okay, well look, I mean, let's move on from the North London derby. It's nice to touch upon that, and obviously it's fantastic to get our 3rd win. I keep saying it, but it means a lot to me.
It's just so good. It's guaranteed if we'd have lost, we'd be talking about this for much longer. And I'm sure when people are listening to this, they'll be thinking, why aren't we talking about it for much longer? Well, all the players did their job. We won the game, and that's all there really was to it. The only outstanding thing was probably the Ox's ability from midfield, and just the promise that he's going to show. But would you have also picked Koscielny as your man of the match? Because I wouldn't have done.
I thought Mertesacker was quite good.
Yeah. I think it. I'd probably given it to the Ox, or probably actually I'd have given it to Rosicky because of the goal and the number of chances that he had, and just as a thank you, because he's such a great player and I love the bloke so much. Just brilliant.
Did you really think the Ox had a good game?
First half, I did. Yeah. No, enthusiasm wise. Contribution wise, no, because everything he touched went a million miles off. I mean, when he was at that shot in the first half, and then he was on the right hand side of the goal, and it went out for the left hand side towards the corner flag, and but I just think, just from an enthusiasm point of view, it just made me happy to see someone with that much enthusiasm. Reminds me of the old George Graham days when he had all the fledglings like Merson and all that lot coming through. It was felt that they really understood how we feel, and just made me. I just loved the whole thing. It's just brilliant, and to do it there again, and you see in the crowd all those toothless, unwashed Neanderthals there shouting and screaming. It looked like a picture of the old American Wild West from the 1800s, where they all look inbred and wooden teeth and all gummy. Just dirty scumbags.
They weren't very happy, were they, Danny? They weren't very happy.
There was this one picture of this big fat bird with greasy ginger hair, and she struggled to stand up with all of her lard and scream something. But did you notice that they had to keep cutting out every time that we've got a throw in? You'd hear some bloke in the background in the crowd go, "You throw," and then they changed it to another microphone. So they must have had someone on the buttons.
Always the case when you go down the lane. So with our victory today, we've obviously brought St Totteringham's Day a day closer. Hopefully that will come sooner rather than later. But let's move on to the next issue, which has been in the news actually over the last few days, with lots of Arsenal fans coming up with their own theories, and lots of Arsenal fans quite annoyed by the state of injuries that we've got at Arsenal. Me personally, I read somewhere that Arsenal have got the same number of injuries as Manchester United, Chelsea and Manchester City all together. Now, my point of view over the last couple of years has been, is it just a case of bad luck? We genuinely just get all these types of injuries again and again and again. Leg breaks you can't really have too much control over. Cruciate ligament injuries, again, is that just down to rotten luck, or is it down to warm-up style of play, training, players being brought back too early, not being conditioned well enough? So there's lots of things that I kind of want to discuss, and for that, we've decided to bring in Dominic, obviously from Australia. Dom, do you want to just say a few words about what you do out there?
The easiest way to explain it to people, I guess for you guys, is when Yaya Sanogo went away from the club to seek some sort of more specialist type work to get his body right for Premier League type play. That's basically what I do. More consulting type work, bit more one-on-one type stuff, specifics with biomechanics and things like that.
Okay, and obviously biomechanics is the study of what muscles, joints, and
yeah, basically your body is a bunch of pulleys and levers. So all the bones are the levers and all the muscles are the pulleys. And if things aren't working quite right, then that's when you can run into some trouble. Especially when you've got athletes like footballers that are so highly strung. They're kind of like F1 cars. It only takes one little thing to go wrong, and it ends up being a very big thing. So they're pushing themselves right on the edge every time they run around out there.
Okay, and just for the sake of the listeners that aren't aware of it, we were talking about Yaya Sanogo prior to recording. What actually happened to Yaya? Because he was reported as being injured for a few months, but actually it turns out that Arsenal had sent him on a rehab program to develop his muscle to become back stronger. So what actually did he go through?
When a player like Yaya Sanogo is obviously quite a slightly built lad, he's quite young still. The amount of cardiovascular training it takes to get fitness to be able to run around and play football and trying to build muscle at the same time is kind of you can't do it basically. So what he would have had to do is go away from the club and do a strength and conditioning program that's basically designed purely for his body to develop some muscle in some areas that he may have been deficient in. Because he did have some injury problems. He had a cruciate ligament injury, I think, at some point. So a lot of sort of work on that. Getting some strength in the core, strength in the legs, building up a little bit of muscle, and like I said, trying to be a full-time footballer and do all the cardiovascular training and build muscle. It just doesn't happen, so that's why he would have gone away from the club to do something a little bit more specific.
Okay, well that's really interesting. Danny, I suppose just as a starting point, you've probably got some data on in terms of our injuries. Have you got maybe a quick summary of the injuries that we've had this year and what our current position is in terms of like an overall league table?
Yeah, well, there was someone pointed this out to me the other day. There is an injuryleague.com. If people go there, and then there's a list for 2014, and it says here, based on figures taken weekly detailing number of players out for each club on physioroom.com, which is my favourite injury site. One player injured for 1 week equals 1 point. Now, this season, Arsenal have 227 points. That's a cumulative 227 weeks of injuries the club have had. Now, if you take out Diaby from that, then that's going to, because he's been out for an entire year this week, I think. And then, so we were on 227 weeks. Next down, Man United, 160 weeks. Villa, 157 weeks. And at the bottom of the league, Cardiff, 54 weeks. Now, that's just terrible. And then currently we have 5 players injured. We have me and Dominic spoke the other night for about 2 hours, and he told me some really interesting stuff that I don't know if we've got time to go into about the history of Jack Wilshere's injuries and what he did back in the early days, which has caused him to have future injuries. But at the moment, Wilshere's out for 4 weeks. He's got a foot injury, and so far he's been out for 12 days. Aaron Ramsey, thigh strain. He's been out for 81 days. And he's due back any day now. Theo Walcott, cruciate ligament tear. He's been out for 72 days. They reckon he's got another 3 months. Abu Diaby, cruciate ligament tear, been out for 366 days. Happy anniversary, Abu, if you're listening. And he's got back in about 3 weeks. And finally, Mesut Ozil has a hamstring injury, been out for 6 days, and they reckon he'll be back in about 3 weeks. Now, you were saying with the long-term injuries, if I have a quick look and pick out the biggies, Lucas Podolski, hamstring injury, 115 days. Frimpong, cruciate ligament tear, yet again, 187 days. Monreal, unknown injury, 52 days. Thomas Vermaelen, lower back, 89 days. The Ox, knee injury, 145 days. This is just this season. Zelalem, it says unknown, 46 days. Sanogo, lower back, 153 days. And then The last one, Vermaelen, knee injury, 53 days. So that's just this season. So that's just...
Well, that sounds quite severe, and I mean, the gist that I'm picking up is that we seem to get a lot of soft tissue injuries, muscular injuries. We have a lot of unknown kind of injuries, and Pedro, one of the reasons why I was really keen to have you on tonight's pod is because, like myself, I know you've been sort of questioning or maybe sort of looking into or wondering why we seem to be getting these types of injuries. So, as a starter for 10, do you want to maybe put your thoughts into the ring?
So I guess to put everybody in the loop of my knowledge of sports science, I'm not trained in sports science. I'm just a fanboy. When it comes to the subjects, I've got a very top line overview of what it's all about. I speak to people who work in sport, who work with Arsenal, who work for Arsenal, and people that work in other games like rugby, and Arsenal just get a lot of the fundamentals wrong, and I think like it's way more detail. I think a lot of people focus on the medical department being the problem, but the medical department, the people that deal with the output of the issues that surround the club, and I think our whole approach to fitness, like it's fairly obvious how it's going to end every season, and it always ends in the same way. We don't have players who have the power and pace towards the end because they're completely exhausted the whole way through. But generally, the only time our top players get a rest is when they get injured. And I just think, like, you look at Arsenal's key players this season, Theo Walcott and Aaron Ramsey have been out most of the season. I just don't think that they're looked after the way they should be, because the way Arsene Wenger approaches picking his starting 11 is the same way a fan would. Like, play your best 11, and as we've seen, like Giroud, he plays all the minutes. He looks great for the first half of the season. Second half of the season, he looks exhausted physically, but he also looks exhausted mentally. Exactly the same with Ozil. You look at Ozil's sprint ratio at what sprints at the start of the season compared to now. Like he's a shadow of the player that he was. And then we play him 2 games in a week, and he picks up a hamstring injury. Like the soft tissue injuries are avoidable to an extent. There's an element of luck in some of the injuries, like Theo Walcott's. Like I know that some people say that you can't help that, but then you look at the stats, and he played 5 games in 16 days after having all that time off. Like it just doesn't look like we manage our fitness in the same way that other teams do. I just think that Arsene Wenger's approach is stuck in '98, when being great at fitness was stopping your players being alcoholics and stopping them eating pizza for dinner, and it just doesn't seem to have evolved in the same way that someone's like Dortmund. I mean, Dortmund are probably one of the prime examples of a team that got it completely right over the last few years, and then there's Barcelona. But I'm not an expert in it, but I just think when you look at the basics, we play players for too long, they start playing badly because they're tired, then they get mentally tired because they start playing badly, and then they get injured. So, that's just my assessment.
Well, similar to you, Pedro. I mean, I've heard issues about our fitness coaching and how we've often brought back players too quickly. We're maybe overusing players in too many games, and we're very, very close to what Arsene refers to as that red zone. But in recent days, and obviously it was quite timely during the week because we've been really struck down quite badly in midfield, and we're playing with our with what's kind of remaining, missing Ramsey and Wilshere and now Ozil, and like Danny's very well illustrated, we've got quite a comprehensive injury list. So many people have put together various suggestions of from the time that we train our players being different to when we actually play our games, to the style of play, to Wenger bringing back players far too early, to the medical incompetence of our medical staff, and not really misdiagnosing things. There are so many different things, and like you, I'm just a football fan, and from my point of view as a layman, I think it's a case of having a squad that's probably just not strong enough, not having enough depth, and so players are being forced into playing too many games. I also think it's a case of players being brought back too quickly. This is obviously without any inside knowledge or any kind of detailed knowledge on the actual subject, but that's just my opinion, and it's hugely frustrating as a football fan. So can we go to you, Tom? What are your thoughts on the injury situation at Arsenal? Why do you think we keep getting these soft tissue injuries on a repeated basis, and it seems like we get them more than most?
Yeah, I might start with asking you guys a couple of questions, just so it might paint a little bit of a basic sort of picture. I mean, I'm not going to try to defend the medical staff just because that's my profession or anything, but there are so many other elements to even rehabbing an injury. It goes so deep into the biomechanics of what injury the player's got, whereabouts in the muscle it's located. Is it a tendon injury? Is it right in the belly of the muscle? How long is he going to be out for? How long should he be out for? Sometimes the scans will come back all clear. You send the player out and then they tear something else. Perfect example of that's Sergio Aguero. He injured his calf against Arsenal, missed 4 weeks, came back, did his hamstring, missed some more time, came back, and he's done his hamstring again. And yet you don't really hear the same kind of knocks on their medical staff as that maybe you are with Arsenal at the moment. But he's the most important player, arguably, and they can't keep him out on the park. You've got Robin van Persie, who got a jab in his groin to play against Arsenal, and then ended up missing about 4 or 6 weeks after that. So it's not mutually exclusive to Arsenal when it comes to gambling and rolling the dice with important players, or perhaps bringing them back too fast. But I'll just go into ask you guys a couple of questions. So out of the top 5 European leagues, which do you guys think is the toughest and fastest pace-wise and the most physical?
I would say the Premier League.
Okay, and in the Premier League, which team or teams play the most high possession game and the most movement-based game?
Arsenal, Everton, Manchester United, maybe?
Okay, so you've got Arsenal in there, and out of those teams, basically you've got Arsenal playing every 3 days. You don't have a squad depth the size of Manchester United over previous seasons. It's nearly impossible for us to compete with Manchester City and Chelsea being able to sell Juan Mata, have Willian and Lampard just sitting on the bench, being able to rotate players midweek to the extent that they do. So I think Arsenal's in a little bit of a catch-22 in some situations where he may roll the dice a little bit more times than others, but sometimes it comes down to the player. I was talking to Danny about this the other day. Mesut Ozil just come off of having a rest over Christmas. He had a rest after the Bayern game. So he still had time off. Then he came back for the Everton game, and then he came back for the Bayern Munich game in the second leg. And to have a grade 2 hamstring tear in the 5th minute, to me, it would suggest that he's gone into that game with some tightness. Now, I don't know, but that would just be an educated guess to injure something within 5 minutes at that level. There's no fatigue built up by then. And so it makes you sort of wonder how much of the onus is on Mesut Ozil to say to the staff, you know what, guys, my hamstring's actually really tight. I'm not sure if it's a good idea that I run around out there today. Okay, but on the flip side of that, can you imagine the media? Can you imagine the pressure the guy has been under, the absolute slamming he would have copped in the media if he'd pulled out last minute with a hamstring tightness, and after the first leg against Bayern Munich not performing so well? You can sort of understand, I work with sort of professional athletes, and they are human beings. They've got feelings, and I kind of feel for the guy a little bit, because he would have wanted nothing more than to go out there and perform. And even though he might have felt some tightness in his hamstring, the thought of copping an absolute spray by the media and Arsenal fans might have been a little bit too much for him to actually put his hand up and say, you know what, maybe I'm not quite right.
I think there are two things there. I think you're absolutely right. Players are people, and from what I understand, the second injury to Aaron Ramsey when he was nearly back from fitness was down to him in training, taking it too hard when he should have gone into a training game with a softer approach. So he hit it too hard because he was so keen to get back. But the point about the squad for me is totally moot. I mean, Arsene Wenger has got £140 million in cash surplus that he could have invested in the squad. It's for 4 or 5 years, we've known the reason that we struggle towards the end of the season is because generally Arsene Wenger goes into a season with 16 players he trusts rather than 20 to 25. So I don't think saying Arsene Wenger has a small squad and that's the issue. We know that's the issue. So why don't you purchase players that can come in and do a job for you? That's really the issue.
Oh, absolutely. I've got no arguments with that whatsoever. That's probably a different argument altogether, whether it's his, I guess just pointing the blame is when you're emotionally invested in something like we all are. When it doesn't go quite right, you're always looking for an outlet for your frustration, whether it be a player, whether it's a manager, whether it's the fitness staff or whatever it may be. That's why we're obviously having this little chat now, is to try to shed some light on the whole situation. And that's probably a very big part of it. You're right, is that the squad depth that we don't possess, is there a legitimate reason for that? Is there Arsene Wenger needing to put his hand up for that? But as far as the actual injuries go and why we're getting those soft tissue injuries, I think looking at the thing as a little bit more of a broader scope, like I said, we're playing a very high possession game. The passing and the moving that we do is unlike a lot of the other teams. You're passing, you're running into space, and you're not receiving the ball. You're running into the space so someone else can get some space in behind you. It's a selfless way of playing, and I think the type of movement these guys are doing is a lot more short, sharp bursts of movement, and it's constant, and it's just relentless, and it's a lot harder to do than what Chelsea do, which is put two banks of four back, sit back, move side to side, and sprint up the pitch every 3 minutes on a counter-attack. So the energy that it takes to play the Arsenal way, even if they did have a bigger squad, is going to, scientifically, it does take a little bit more out of the players. So whether the squad needs to be deeper because the manager's not buying players to do so, then I guess that's a different argument for another day. But as far as the players that we have got, that's sort of a good little place to start.
So on that then, Dom, I mean, obviously all clubs can only register 25 players, so I could sit here and say, well, then Arsenal should go out and buy another 10 players to kind of accommodate the fact that we always seem to get these injuries. I said that in the last podcast, that if we are not in control of the injuries that we get, but we know that they happen, the one thing that we are in control of is the quality of the depth of the squad. And like Pedro said, I'm completely in agreement with him. I think we know that injuries happen to us year after year after year. We just have to accept that they happen and just buy adequate depth, buy adequate players. But you make an interesting point. If it's in the style of our play, then do you not think there should be a different approach to the way maybe we condition our muscles, i.e. the way that they train, the way that they go through these kind of like rehab programs, the way that they maybe warm up, warm down? Is there no science to, is there another way of maybe doing what we do from a medical point of view, from a scientific point of view, to try and adjust to the way that we play, if that makes sense?
Look, the guys at the club, I'm very confident in saying that you've got to keep on the ball. As a team as big as Arsenal, you've got players out there that are on hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. You can't afford to have them sitting on the injury table, taking up wages. You know, you're paying these guys good money to be out there playing. You want them playing. You want them as fit as possible to be able to last the season. So I'm pretty confident that the team are doing all they can to try to keep up with the science, I guess, behind trying to keep people fitter. But yes, to answer your question, I guess, yes, you do sort of train players. Well, you should be training players differently depending on position. You know, your goalkeeper's not going to do the amount of running around that a midfielder's going to do, sort of things like that. But it's hard. I mean, I've noticed, I don't know about you guys, but today's a good example, going 1-0 up and then sitting back and absorbing some pressure. It's actually probably a little bit easier than having to run and press, get the ball back, pass, move. So I think in our style of play this season, we have sort of adapted slightly, perhaps. Whether that's been anything to do with that or not, I'm not too sure. Whether it's just a Steve Bold thing and he's brought in a little bit more of a defensive stability there and Arsene Wenger trusts the guys to defend a bit more. But like I said, you know, playing like Chelsea do, even Man City to an extent when they play that counter-attacking football, it is a little bit less taxing.
No, I think you're right. You see, given Arsene Wenger's recent comments in his last press conference before the Spurs game, he did say that Arsenal are going to investigate these types of injuries, which does suggest that even they have now cottoned onto the fact that there could be something wrong. I'm not going to try and twist his words or anything, but obviously we do seem to have more injuries than most, and there's got to be something behind the scenes that we can do. One of the points of putting this podcast together was to basically try and dispel a few myths. So I'm just going to ask you some quick fire questions, and this is to all of you guys. I just want to, I mean, Dom, is there any risk of injury by training at, let's say, 10 o'clock in the morning and having matches at 3 p.m. or in the evening time? Does the time of day matter, yes or no?
No.
Okay. Do you think it's a case of, and this is ridiculous in my opinion, but do you think it's Arsene Wenger intentionally bringing players back, yes or no, early?
I don't think that would. It's hard to know. Look, at the end of the day, he's the one selecting the players. One of my points I was going to get to later is that the health and medical staff should be saying to Arsene Wenger, this player is not available for selection. That's where some responsibility lies with those guys. If they're not 100% confident with the player, handing them back to full training, they should be telling the manager he's not available.
So, you know, we've read recently, or I've heard recently, that there have been players that have been dangerously close to the red zone. And they've been, you know, Arsene's known about it, and he's been put forward these players for selection, and he's still gone and selected them. But I think that's, as Pedro kind of identified earlier, it could just be because of the lack of depth in our squad and just out of need, really, that we've had to play these players. So Pedro, over to you. I mean, what are your thoughts on the whole Jack Wilshere situation? I think it's an injury that fans are really sort of keen to know about because he seems to just keep picking up nicks and knocks, every sort of 6 to 7 weeks. So what are your thoughts on Jack?
I think there's a number of things. First of all, Jack Wilshere got injured on international duty, and I think it's an absolute disgrace that we're putting teams into players into international games when it's crunch time for clubs all over the world. So that's the first point. Second point is it was an impact injury, and like I said, it's a broken bone in his foot. There's not much you can do about that. But I think most of Jack Wilshere's issues this season have come from the fact that he's got the pressure of a nation on his shoulders going into a World Cup, and people are questioning whether he's the Gaza they all thought he was going to be, and I think he's struggling. I think he's also struggling with the fact that Aaron Ramsey's become this sort of European superstar. So I don't know much about Jack's fitness issues. I just don't think he knows his place in the team, and I don't think I think he's struggling with it in the same way that Ramsey was struggling when he was being played out on the right midfield last season.
I think the issue that I have with Jack is that he's being brought back too early. Too often, and I think he breaks down, and he's from a performance point of view, because he knows how good he was during that 1 year and how good we all know he can be. I think he's almost trying too hard every time he gets into the team. And like you say, we don't really know what his best position is. I mean, before Ozil came, he could have maybe sat in that number 10 role, and now he's the kind of like deep line playmaker, or he's that player, ahead of the DM and behind Ozil. He just doesn't quite have an identity. And I've seen him, play out left wing as well. I think we saw him play left wing at West Brom this year, and that's the frustration that I've got. So he's trying too hard. So he needs to get back to basics. But the whole injury side, I just keep thinking that he keeps being brought back too early. There are issues with his fitness, and I don't know where we kind of go from here. But Danny, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, the other night me and Dom spoke for a couple of hours, and Dom, you brought up something which I thought was incredibly interesting, because if you think of the word Arsenal and the word injury, what's the first thing that springs to mind for everybody? Jack Wilshere, or unlucky. Now you said, yeah, unfortunately, but you said that you took me right back to the very first injury that Jack Wilshere got, didn't you? And then you explained how he compensated for that, and then how that led to another. Do you want to start from the beginning with that? Because I think that's the one people will most want to hear about.
All right. So basically, being so young, when you're putting your body under so much stress, and repetitive movements like running are a degenerative movement, especially while the body's still developing and growing. So stress fractures are quite a common thing for athletes to develop, and that was Jack's problem. He had a stress fracture, and I think it was the New York Red Bulls game where it really, in that preseason match that year, where it really got to him. But basically, he would have been feeling pain in his foot for quite a while before he actually had a knock on it, which actually caused a proper problem. And then from there, if you'd gotten it early enough, he just would have had to have a little bit of time out. The stress fracture can heal. You can go through some rehab and you can get back into it. But by having surgery and needing screws put in, trying to get those bones to mend, it's not even a guarantee that that's going to work. There could be more surgery, more complications. But while that's happening, you get some degeneration in your muscles. So he's stuck in this boot where his ankle can't flex and contract properly. So therefore, his other leg's going to have to start compensating by taking more strain while he's just walking around in a boot. And then once he gets the boot off, then he has to go through a process of building that muscle back up, making sure he's not compensating on the other leg. And you can sort of see how things start to develop, where it's the best analogy I can think of is if you've got a wheel alignment in your car, and if your car's wheels aren't in alignment properly, you drive around, eventually your tyres are going to wear unevenly and you're going to have problems. So it's the same thing when you're going through a rehab process. You have to make sure that the balances are in check and everything's in check. And so even when the scans show up that the bones are healed, everything's fine, and that there are actual sort of no remnants of any injuries left, the scar tissue's been broken down, he's gone through some rehab, even now he won't have as much movement in his whatever ankle it was to his good one. So whenever he's running around with some biomechanical issues. It can get better over time, but it's always going to be something that you're going to end up struggling with a little bit. So having that injury at such a young age, with that type of injury, it's almost like a bit of an Aaron Ramsey-esque type situation. But luckily for Aaron, he's just gone the other way, whereas his biomechanics seem to be a lot better. I don't know if you guys notice when Jack runs, he runs quite funny.
Yeah. His legs are quite wide. Yeah,
and he's got his head right up in the air, so his biomechanics even naturally are quite strange. But yeah, having that injury like that at such a young age and being out of the game for so long, it then creates imbalances. It then puts pressure on other areas, and then so you are more susceptible to different injuries in different places. So even though it was his foot that was the problem, if he gets something with a hamstring or a calf or a quad or a lower back, it can still be all linked.
That's really, really interesting stuff. But I'm just worried now, having heard all of that, in terms of Jack's longer term future. Now, obviously, I can't expect you to predict what's going to happen 5, 10 years down the line. But are you saying then, Dom, that this is very likely something that's going to be affecting Jack's career for the rest of his career, that he's just going to have to deal with picking up knocks as he comes back from other injuries? Is this something that you feel is the case?
Look, I personally think that with the way that Jack Wilshere runs around, he's probably going to be one of those guys that's going to pick up a knock and a strain here and there regardless, just because of his biomechanics are quite strange. But I think the onus is on Jack. I mean, he caught that knock in that international game. It was a friendly, and yet he decided to play on for the rest of the game. The rest of the half before he got subbed out. And that, to me, you would think that after having so long out with some injury the first time he got stepped on in the New York Red Bulls game, that he might put his hand up and go, you know what, I'm not taking a risk, I'm coming off. The onus has to be on the player a little bit more in those situations. If he's feeling a bit tight, if he's feeling a bit sore, he needs to say to the fitness staff, the medical team, the manager, you know what, I'm on that, I can feel my body, I'm on the edge now, I think it's time that I have a few days off, or I take training a little bit lighter this week. But then you've got that situation like you guys were discussing before, where if Aaron Ramsey and Jack Wilshere are both fit, and Jack's feeling a little bit tight in his hamstrings, you think he's going to go to the manager and say, I'll let Aaron have a run this week, I'm not quite up to it? There's no chance. That in there lies a little bit of an issue as well, is that there's competition for places, which is great, but then you've got players that might be going into games feeling a little bit off. And I mean, medical staff and even the training and fitness staff, Arsene Wenger, you can't see inside someone's body all the time. You can't see that he might have a hot spot in his foot. You can't see that he's got some tightness in his hamstring unless they tell you so.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Dom. Honestly, I think I said that in the last podcast, that I think that there is onus on the players to basically admit or inform to the medical team that they're just not ready. And as individuals, I mean, even us, we're not professional footballers, but when you're going to the gym, or when you're playing football, that if you're not 80 or 90%, then in your head that you just don't feel quite comfortable, you don't feel quite 100%. And I think if players are in that situation, they really need to tell the manager, they really need to inform the medical team. But like you said, Dom, at the start, these players are human beings. They're obviously full of pride, and they don't want to let anyone down. And like the pressure was on Ozil in Germany, in front of the German press, and especially after the first leg, you just take that risk, you take that chance. And unfortunately, by doing that and putting yourself into the fire, you're going to get burned. Danny, did you want to ask about other players?
Yeah, another really interesting thing that I didn't really think about when with you, Dom, was you said that because of the severity and the type of injury that Theo's got and the kind of player he is, I gave the analogy, I said, is it a little bit like Michael Owen? When he got that injury in the World Cup, he was never the same player again. What did you say about Theo and his knee injury? Do you reckon he'll ever be the old Theo ever again?
Oh, hopefully. It is possible. I've actually rehabbed a few professional athletes with ACL injuries back, and they're playing basically the equivalent of from, League One or Championship football, whatever it is over there for you guys, to Premier League. So they've made the step up. So physically, it is possible to get back to being just as good as you were. With Theo, that same thing happens, because when you tear your ACL, like I said to you, Danny, ligaments are like pieces of blue tack. If you pull them really quickly, they snap. If you pull them really, really slowly and just a little bit, they can stretch but go back to where they were. If you pull them a little bit too much, they'll stretch and they won't go back to where they were. So what happens with Theo is that he stuck his foot out for a challenge and someone's fallen across his knee, and that ACL has just disappeared. And it was quite obvious to me at the time, because one of the telltale signs of an ACL injury is that you'll be in some actually excruciating pain for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden there'll be no pain at all and you think you're fine. Hence the 2-0 symbol as he was coming off. He probably didn't think that it was as bad as what it was. But with someone like Theo, yes, it's definitely possible, but you're taking a graft generally from the hamstring tendon and you're putting it back into where a ligament once was. So you're replacing a tendon with a ligament. You just never know how someone's going to recover, and that's why there's so many variables with different injuries. It's the same with Aaron Ramsey with his injury. For me, when I saw that happen, I saw him reach quite high up onto his quad. So again, you need white blood cells to repair. They're your repairing cells, and you've got less blood flow in your tendons than you do the belly of your muscle. And so he's reached quite high up to where the tendon is. And straight away I went, oh, because it's going to be a lot harder recovery process. It might be the same grade tear, but just in a completely different spot in a hip flexor muscle, which is responsible for lifting your leg every time you try to run. Hence why he's probably having a lot of trouble getting back to just that extra little bit of fitness. But getting back to Theo, like it's really difficult to know. It just completely depends on how well his rehab goes, how good his biomechanics are. If he runs into any problems recovering, not only from the knee, but the hamstring graft as well, because he relies on his pace so much. So, look, I was absolutely devastated when I found out Theo was out, because I just thought that having him fit with a fit Ozil would have done some real damage. But not having someone to run in behind the defence, I do hope that he can come back and that he can get in and he can keep his pace up. But also that it's the fast change of direction as well. And not only that, it's a confidence thing when you do an ACL. It's quite a scary injury. It's probably the one that no player wants to do. So we saw with Aaron Ramsey when he first came back, it took him a long time just not only to find his feet, but even just the confidence to go into a challenge and to get near the ball and
psychologically.
Yeah, psychologically it can take you, not only will the injury take him a good 10 months to recover from, it's going to take him probably another 6 to 8 months, depending on the player, obviously, but psychologically it takes a fair toll as well.
Pedro, we've learnt from being Arsenal fans for years that players, once they get to their late 20s, early 30s, like Merson and Parler and the players like that have had hard times and have been kicked a lot, they start to look after their bodies a little bit more and take more precautions. Like they'll say, I don't think I should play, or they don't rush to come back. How do you think we're going to get the younger generation of people like the Ox and Gnabry and other people of that kind of age? How are we going to get them to understand that if you have a niggle, tell someone, don't play, because you're going to fuck yourself up long term?
That's more a question for Dom. I don't work with young players, but just from working with people in general, I think if you explain, look, if you play with a niggle, that those 2 games that you miss could turn into 8 or 9, or you could win a World Cup. I think that if you highlight to them that they didn't cover as much ground on the pitch because they're obviously carrying a knock. Like I think players are better educated now. I think Ray Parlour looked after his body better than he did in his early 20s, because in his early 20s he was an alcoholic. I think players understand a lot more about what makes them tick at an earlier age, and I think they're educated better. I mean, like the difference between where football is now from an awareness perspective when it comes to looking after yourself and where it was like 15 years ago, like it's a million miles ahead. Like how fast the game, and Dom, like correct me if I'm wrong, but the game 5 years ago compared to where it is now, like there's so much more expertise now. It's not about like a football manager is like a CEO of a big company now. It's not about one man like dictates all, which is really what happens at Arsenal. Brendan Rodgers has got it working so well at Liverpool because he has an incredible head of fitness. He has an amazing first team coach. He has somebody working on physio and recovery. Like, so it's about managing departments, taking the information and using that information to make an informed decision. And I think players are part of that now. Like they know their bodies better than they ever have because there's more tools and technology that can help inform that. So I don't think it's such a problem now. Like if Jack Wilshere thinks that playing with a partial hamstring injury is a good idea, and then he gets a really bad hamstring injury, he'll learn pretty quickly that next time he's got a tight hamstring, don't just tell someone, just drop out of a game and get fit, and then when you play to the best of your ability.
You would hope so, Pedro. You would hope so. I'm sure listeners are dying to know, and this is the sort of final question before we kind of summarise. But Dom, or to Pedro as well. I mean, and indeed, of course, Danny. But DRB, he is the long-term sick note. Unfortunately, the poor boy's career has just been stop, start, stop, 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 stop. He seemed to picked up so many injuries during his time at Arsenal. But what does the future hold for him? Dom, do you think it's time to give up football? Do you think there's any way back for him? He's picked up so many different types of injury. What do you think's gone wrong?
Well, the latest one, the ACL injury, it's hard to know if that was just a sudden change of direction and his ACL just gave out, or whether he copped a knock in training like Theo-esque. But if you, again, you go back to, he's a good example. every player is an individual. Everybody recovers differently. Everyone has different biomechanics. And when he had his ankle broken the first time, same kind of situation with the Theo Walcott, not Theo, Jack Wilshere, where you're in a boot, you're restricted movement. He doesn't have the same movement in that ankle anymore. And then now you're starting to work biomechanically unevenly, and that's where you're putting extra strain on other areas of the body. That's why you're picking up a quad strain, a hamstring strain, a calf tear, and you're just picking up these little niggles all the time. But unfortunately for Abu Dhabi, I mean, like I said, I work with these guys, and to have something that they're so passionate about and something that they love so much taken away from them like that, it's pretty sad. And I've got a lot of respect for him for being able to get back into the rehab thing and trying to get back to being at full fitness. But unfortunately for him personally, I can't see him ever putting together a full season again at the top flight. Maybe at a lower league where the physical demands aren't maybe as much. They don't have to play so often, but yeah, I just personally can't see it happening. I think it was a big gamble to go into the season last year with him, and put so many eggs in the basket of hoping that he stayed fit because of his record and because of the problems that he's had. But yeah, for me, I'm not too sure that he's going to be able to. I hope he does, but it doesn't look good, no.
And Pedro, what are your thoughts on Diaby? Do you think it's time to let him go? And when's his contract up for expiry? Is it next season or this summer?
I think it's next year.
Yeah.
I just think like a lot of people feel sympathetic towards him, and I totally understand. Like he's a young man, like his body can't deal with the rigors of football. But like let's put a bit of reality into the situation here. This is a guy turning in £65,000 a week. Like he's more than looked after. If you can't physically make it into work and you're a builder, you simply don't get paid. We're not a charity. Like I can't believe Arsene Wenger gave him a 6-year deal despite all the injury problems that he had before. It's time to cut him loose. Let's come to a deal on the last year of his contract. Like we spent at least the first 4 years of his latest contract hoping that he'd come back in, so he blocked the space. And it's just time to say, look, if you can't maintain fitness, and move it on. Like it's not like we're moving on a builder who can't earn a salary if he's not fit. Like he's wealthy beyond anybody's wildest dreams. It's time to just go. This is a sports club. You can't do the job. We've given you the best training and rehab that you can possibly get. Goodbye.
Yep, I completely appreciate your points of view, actually, Pedro. I think there's a lot of Arsenal fans that feel that way. Danny, did you have anything to add on Diaby, or are you just sort of gutted, just like me, to see his career fall apart?
I just keep seeing that game against Liverpool where I think he scored 2 goals. His contract expires 30th of June 2015, but I think out of loyalty, but they're going to be very sentimental when it comes to players. Out of loyalty, give him as much time as you want. But again, like Pedro says, if you're a builder and you can't build, you don't get paid. So maybe it is time. I mean, he's 28 in the 11th of May this year. He's had a good run. He's had 8 or 9 years at Arsenal. He's made more money in a year than most of us will make in a lifetime, probably something like that. So you've really got to cut your losses, and it's admirable that he refuses to give up. But sometimes, if the painting's on the wall, as they say, it's time to just go, yeah, I can't make it. Stop wasting everyone's time and stop potentially putting yourself in danger long term, because all these players that need like Hulk Hogan and all that lot that have just gone on and on and on, had new knees, new hips. You don't want to get to the point where the rest of his life is knackered because he just refused to admit that his career is over.
Yeah, it saddens me to say that. I think as great a player as he can be, and he has been on his day, I personally don't see any way kind of back for him. And I think the fact that he occupies a space in the squad and that we're not getting any football out of him, take the sentimental side out of the equation, it probably is time to kind of say, well, we've given it our best. He's given it his best, and it just hasn't worked out. I feel gutted for the boy. Arsene obviously thinks that he's a very, very talented footballer, which is why he stuck by him. But like Pedro says, he makes a very, very good point. We're not, like people say, a charity, and we can't keep supporting people through and through and through. We've given it a great shot, and maybe now the time is up. I just want to kind of bring this to a close. Obviously, it's been a very, an impromptu podcast looking at the North London derby, which will again cover in much greater detail in our regular podcast, which is back on Thursday. But I suppose just to kind of like summarise, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you to Pedro and Dominic for coming in, and Dominic, especially for your insight as to what you think's going on. I think we've kind of like, come to the conclusion that actually injuries is a very, very complex subject. I don't think there's any one particular factor as to why these happen. I used to be very much of the school of thought where I thought it was just rotten bad luck, and then I started believing that actually players were being brought back too early. But I think we can say that, particularly soft tissue injuries, down to a variety of reasons, from style of play, like Dominic suggested, the possession game, the type of movement, to warming up, warming down, training methods. Yes, players being brought back too early, but the onus is on the player to be as honest and as open as they can with medical staff and also the boss. Arsene Wenger and the club can take a little bit of responsibility, or they ought to take a little bit of responsibility for having a smaller core number of players that they use more often than maybe some of the bigger clubs in the Premier League. But I think it's a very complex situation, and as we've also illustrated with Jack Wilshere, biomechanics plays a massive part. Every player is different. Every player's build up, every player's joints, muscles, strength, all that kind of stuff varies, and it's impossible to kind of put it down to one thing. But I'm also glad that we've put to bed some of the ridiculous suggestions that we've had this week from Arsene Wenger bringing back players deliberately to get them injured before they're fully 100%. I refuse to believe that. I don't think that's the case. I think we're all in agreement with that, gentlemen. The timing of training, some people suggested that training at 10 o'clock on a weekday as opposed to playing matches on 3 o'clock at a weekend and having evening games, your body's not conditioned for the time of day. I think that's nonsense. I think also Dominic touched upon the fact that the competence of the medical team. I mean, these guys are professionally trained individuals. The number of comments that we get from medical experts on Twitter, perhaps in the heat of the moment, or perhaps because they may genuinely know better, but medical professionals are not going to misdiagnose players, time and time again. I refuse to believe that, and I think Dominic's put a good case forward. So hopefully we've kind of like dispelled a few of those myths, but obviously there are certain things that need to be looked at. I think Arsene Wenger alluded to that in his press conference before the Tottenham game, that they're going to look into these types of injuries because they seem to rack up at Arsenal. So it's a complex subject. So listeners, thank you very much for listening. Can I just say a quick thanks to everybody that's taken part in the podcast tonight? Pedro, really great to have you. Where can listeners find you?
At Le Grove.
At Le Grove on Twitter. Get involved. And Dominic, a massive thank you to you as well for obviously staying up throughout the night. You've obviously enjoyed North London derby success, but thanks a lot for staying up. Was it 6, 7, 8 a.m. now in Australia?
Yeah, it's about 7:10, yeah.
Wow. And where can people find you on Twitter?
At Ozguna49.
Brilliant. All right. Well, everybody get involved. And Danny, thanks a lot for stepping in and producing it on what's been an certainly interesting one for me, but an impromptu podcast.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We should just also say that Dom has agreed to come on maybe once a month and do an injuries roundup as a guest, because I think it's important that we talk about it, because it's really hard to try and find out any kind of information about injuries, because most people only want to report it if they can be dramatic about it and get headlines about it, rather than just getting down to what's really happening and find out what's going to happen with the players.
Cool. Dom, you're very, very welcome. So that's the end of a Bergkamp Wonderland Arsenal podcast today. I know everybody's had an amazing day because of the North London derby victory. Thank you to Pedro and Dominic for coming on. Thank you for listening. Keep it Arsenal, and we'll see you next week.